Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar about Social Security overpayments for Social Security Disability Insurance, SSDI. We are from Disability Rights New Jersey. We're happy to have you here with us today. I will only be on screen for a couple minutes. Will be our facilitator behind the scenes. My name is Mike Murata. I'm the director of the Richard West Assistive Technology Advocacy Center at Disability Rights New Jersey. And I will be your tech support behind the scenes. If something happens on your end, open up the chat, send me a private message, and I will help you work out. I don't know, whatever tech problem happens, I'll help you work it out. Quick housekeeping before I turn it over to our presenters for today. You have a chat box. Please use it. We would love to hear from you as we go through. You have questions or comments, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We do request, please don't put any personal information in the chat in your questions. We won't be able to answer questions that are very specific for your situation because, quite honestly, we don't have enough information to do that right now. But if you give us kind of broad, general questions related to your issue, we should be able to hopefully provide you some information. Whatever questions aren't answered, we can follow up with you at some point. We have all of your information. That sounds very scary. It wasn't meant to sound scary, but we do have all your information from when you register. So we can certainly do that. A couple other quick housekeeping things before I turn it over to the group. We are recording the session. We will follow up with you with the link to the recording so you could review it at a later date. I would look for that in the next day or two, probably sometime tomorrow or maybe even Monday as we go forward. If you joined us on the phone, I see there are some people that joined us on the phone. I know using the chat on the phone is just not really an option, but when we get to the questions part at the end, if you do have a question and you're on the phone, please feel free to unmute yourself, kind of wait for a second where there's no one else speaking and jump in and let us know you have a question and we will make sure that we acknowledge that. And then finally, there are captions for our webinar today. If you need the captions to support you throughout the webinar, you can look to the bottom and there is a captions button. It may say live transcript, it may say CC for captions, but it's along the bottom on your Zoom menu bar along the bottom. And with that, oh, I do have one other slide. Sorry, I forgot everybody. I had another slide. Again, we are Disability Rights New Jersey. We are a private nonprofit, and we provide legal and advocacy services to individuals with disabilities across New Jersey. We are New Jersey's Protection and Advocacy Agency. We've been designated by the governor and we're incorporated in 1994. And then finally, our mission is to preserve the human, civil, and legal rights of persons with disabilities. And with that, I will turn it over to our presenters and have them introduce themselves and get us started.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kathleen Redpath Perez, and I'm the managing attorney for the employment unit.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Charles Auslander. I'm an attorney here at Disability Rights New Jersey. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Susan Head, and I'm a senior staff advocate on the employment team at Disability Rights.
All right, excellent. I'm going to get us started. I don't like going after Mike because he's so good at this, but we keep setting it up that way. So I will do my best. I'm going to start with just a brief explanation of what Social Security disability insurance is, only because I want to make sure that you're in the right place. We had a webinar last week that was on SSI overpayments. SSDI overpayments are handled differently, and there are different rules and just different ways to tackle them, different consequences. And so that's why we have two separate webinars. So just briefly, eligibility for SSDI comes down to a person or survivor, and this is either the spouse or child of someone who died while eligible for SSDI. And this is a person or a survivor who's had enough work credits to be able to qualify for SSDI. And this is also a person who's not able to work. They're not able to perform substantial work activity. Another way to figure out if you're on SSI or SSDI is to look to the top of the notice. that will assist you as well with figuring out if you're in the right place. Next slide, please. I'm also going to do a brief overview on what an overpayment is. If you were here last time, this is going to be a refresher. If not, then this is new to you. An overpayment is when Social Security believes that a person has received more benefits than they should have received. It's a debt to the federal government, and Social Security, they are going to seek to recover that debt. What's important to know about an overpayment is that you might not get notice of it right away, which is why later on in this webinar, you're going to be hearing about reporting your income accurately and making sure that Social Security is aware of any deductions you're entitled to, because you might find out, and we're going to have a case example where exactly that happens, a year after that you have this overpayment and now you owe all this money. And so hopefully by watching this webinar, you're going to learn if you're in this situation, how to get out of the situation, or just how to avoid this kind of problem in the future. Next slide, please. So we are going to go to our learning objectives, and those are what you're going to learn today. The first is, what is a trial work period? We're also going to teach you how do you file for a waiver of your overpayment. Finally, you're going to learn, among other things, what are impairment-related work expenses, which is also known as IRWE. Next slide, please. Now, generally, the way you find out that you have an overpayment is you're going to get a letter from Social Security. And so, as we said in the last webinar, it's really important to hold on to any paperwork that is received by Social Security and to make sure that you're paying attention to those notices, because there are deadlines that you're going to have to comply with. It's also important to pay attention to any letters during this time, because at the same time you're receiving a letter of an overpayment, you could also be receiving notice that you are being terminated from Social Security. Next slide, please. So one of the most important things that you're going to learn today is about the substantial gainful activity. So do not go over SSA's substantial gainful activity is the message that we have that we want all of you to really pay attention to today, because if you go over that cliff, and I'm going to explain what that is, you're not going to be getting your benefit. You're going to be at risk for losing your SSDI. So I want to explain about a trial work period. A trial work period is a period of time where you could essentially test out if you're ready to go back to the workplace. If you are an individual who has enough work credits and that's why you're on SSDI, then you have a history of working and you might feel that you're ready to go back. So you have 9 months over the course of 5 years is when the time period in order to test out if you're ready to go back to work. Any month that you earn more than $940 or you've worked more than 80 hours, if you're self-employed, that month is going to count for the trial work period. Once that 9 months is over, and again, it's during a 5-year period, so that means that it's non-consecutive. Once the 9 months is over, you're going to have a grace period, which is known as extended period of eligibility. That's 3 months. After that time period, you have to pay attention to the amount of the amount of money that you're earning and make sure that it does not go over the substantial gainful activity cliff. For 2021, the amount is $13.10 if you're non-blind for the month, and this is gross, and it's $21.90 if you are blind. Next slide, please. And we have an example that we're going to be presenting just to make it easier to illustrate what we're talking about when we explain the substantial gainful activity cliff. So in our example, Alice has been collecting SSDI for 5 years. She started working for the first time 2 years ago, and her gross earnings were $1,500 a month. She receives SSDI at the rate of $1,000 a month. She reported her income to Social Security every month, and she continued to receive her benefit, and so she thought that she was entitled to them. For this example, we're using the substantial gainful activity amount for 2020, which was $1,260 a month. It did increase slightly for 2021, as I indicated. After 2 years of working, Alice receives a letter from Social Security stating that she owes $12,000. After she gets this letter, she becomes afraid and decides to stop working. So I'm going to explain to you, how did Alice get to an overpayment of $12,000? Next slide, please. She was entitled to receive her entire SSDI check during the first 12 months of her employment. And that was because of the trial work period and the grace period that occurs after the 9 month of the trial work period. So during that entire time, it was perfectly fine for her to receive $1,500, which was over the substantial gainful activity amount. Next slide, please. The problem occurred after that 12-month period, after the 9-month period, or initial period, and then the 3-month grace period. That was where the overpayment came from, because she was over the substantial gainful activity level. She was earning $1,500 and she could only earn a maximum of $1,260. So during this time period, after the 12 months, she was not entitled to her SSDI check at all because she was over that amount. The amount is calculated based on the amount of your Social Security check once the time period has passed. And so she was being paid $1,000, and that was for 12 months. And so that's how we got to the figure of $12,000. So you might be wondering, what can Alice do about this overpayment? And so with that, I am going to give the stage to my colleague, Mr. Auslander.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, my name is Charles Auslander. I'm an attorney here at Disability Rights New Jersey, and we're going to talk a little bit about what you can do when you have an overpayment. And I guess we'll go to the next slide. Mike, are we on the next slide yet?
Yes. Yes.
It's one more slide, I think.
One more?
Yep. There we go. So ladies and gentlemen, there's two ways to deal with an overpayment situation for SSDI recipients. The first would be a request for reconsideration, which we'll talk about, and the other is a waiver, which Kathleen referenced earlier. So what is a reconsideration? A request for reconsideration is sometimes called an appeal by the Social Security Administration. The purpose for filing a request for reconsideration is for you as an SSDI beneficiary to challenge the decision that you receive benefits you were not entitled to receive. When you receive an overpayment notice, as Kathleen stated earlier, you need to save any documents that you receive from Social Security. When you read that notice, it will explain to you how much Social Security claims there's an overpayment for, and more importantly, the reason they're claiming that there's an overpayment, that you owe Social Security money and not the other way around. Your goal in filing a request for reconsideration is to show you don't have an overpayment at all and you don't owe Social Security any money. Another goal is that even if you do happen to have an overpayment and you do owe Social Security some amount, you want to show that Social Security did not properly calculate that amount and that you owe less than Social Security claims that you owe. Next slide, please. Okay, when to file for an SSDI reconsideration. This is really important, folks, so please pay attention. The time to file a request for reconsideration is very important. You want to file a timely request for reconsideration so you don't lose your chance to appeal an overpayment notice. The time period that you have is 60 days to file an appeal. However, if you want to continue receiving your full benefits, your full monthly check, while you file your request for reconsideration, you must submit your paperwork within 30 days of the date you receive the overpayment notice. So although you have 60 days to timely file a request for reconsideration or an appeal, as Social Security calls it, you need to file within the first 30 days of that 60 days so you don't have your entire monthly Social Security check withheld. If you fail to file your request for reconsideration within 30 days, Social Security will start to withhold your entire monthly check. That's different than when a supplemental security income or SSI recipient doesn't file within 10 days. The law limits Social Security to only withholding 10% of their monthly benefits. For people listening to this webinar, assuming you're an SSDI recipient, you need to file within the first 30 days after you receive the notice, or they will stop your entire monthly benefit check. Now, if you do receive a notice of overpayment and you do happen to miss the 60-day deadline to file a request for reconsideration, don't panic. You can still file a written request for an extension of time to file your request for reconsideration. You must request an extension of time in writing and establish what Social Security calls good cause for failing to file the request within the initial 60 days after receipt of the notice. An extension of time to file a late request for reconsideration is made to your local Social Security field office. So when you fill out your request for reconsideration, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and you're past that 60-day deadline, you should have a written request to Social Security that you send in at the same time as your request for reconsideration, asking for an extension of time to file your request for reconsideration. Now, what constitutes or what can we call good cause for Social Security as to why you filed after 60 days? Well, that would include circumstances that impeded you as the beneficiary to timely file your request. It could be that Social Security's directions or actions were confusing or misleading when you spoke with someone. It could be that you don't understand as a beneficiary the requirements of the Social Security Act. It might be because of your physical or mental disabilities that you were unable to timely file within 60 days. It could also be that you don't have proficiency in the English language and you didn't understand the forms you had to fill out. And one of the interesting things about a notice of overpayment is that oftentimes they're not entirely clear. Social Security is a bureaucracy. So if you receive a notice of overpayment and you just don't understand what the reasons are that they're claiming you owe them money and they might be stopping your benefits, feel free to contact Social Security, call someone up on the phone, a representative, and ask them to explain the document that you received and you have questions about. Now, essentially, when you're requesting an extension of time to file outside of the 60-day time limit, you simply need to provide a legitimate reason why you're filing a request for reconsideration late. It could be because of personal illness. You need certain records in order to support your case and you don't have them or you need time to acquire them. It could be there was a death in the family. And often you simply didn't receive the overpayment notice in a timely fashion. That often happens. Some people might be transitionally homeless where they receive their mail at a different address. But the bottom line is, as long as you can explain in writing clearly why you weren't able to file within 60 days, you could file that extension of time with your request for reconsideration and then file both with your local Social Security office. I do want to mention that anytime you file a document with Social Security, that you please use a method that's secure and you can prove that you filed or mailed your documents. That would mean mailing your documents through the US mail, either certified mail, return receipt requested, or some other private mailing delivery provider, maybe FedEx or some other service, that you can show that in fact Social Security received your documents or letters or correspondence and that you have proof of that fact if they claim they did not receive it. Next slide, please. Now, we've just said what happens if you don't file a request within that initial 30 days. I'm emphasizing this. I know I mentioned it earlier, but if you fail to file 30 days after you receive the notice, your entire SSDI monthly benefit is going to be withheld. As I indicated also, you need to file documents with Social Security using certified mail or a private mail provider that offers proof that the documents were sent there. If you don't have that proof, if you end up contacting us or someone else for assistance, and you say, well, my check stopped and it's been about 3 months, it's going to be a problem because then you're going to have to explain why you're past that 60-day limit. Next slide, please. Okay, what do you have to file for a Social Security disability insurance request for reconsideration? We talked about the time limit, so I'm sure you understand that now, but Social Security is a bureaucracy and it relies on forms. The form in this case is an SSA 561, which we'll go over in a moment. It's not a complicated form, but basically what you have to understand is that for Social Security disability insurance beneficiaries, Social Security will first offer an opportunity for a case review of your file before they consider your request for consideration. That means that you still have to file timely your request for reconsideration, but once they receive it, Social Security will first conduct a case review of your file. Now, what is a case review? Well, a case review is a paper review of your Social Security account with Social Security. At the time that you file your request for reconsideration or an extension of time, you can also submit supporting documents or other information in support of your request for reconsideration. You will not, however, have a meeting with Social Security representatives at that time. If you're appealing a decision that you're no longer eligible for disability benefits because of your medical condition, say it's improved, you may not be eligible, then you can meet with a Social Security representative and explain why you believe you still have a disability. But if it's just an overpayment case and there's a claim in your overpayment notice that maybe you earned too much income and you went over the substantial gainful activity, they're going to conduct a case review or a paper review of your file first, and then consider the form that you submitted, which is a request for reconsideration, or Social Security calls it an appeal. If your request for reconsideration is denied, then you have the right to go before an administrative law judge who's a hearing officer, and you can present your case to that individual. If the administrative law judge rules against you after a hearing, you can still appeal that determination by going to the appeals council within Social Security. You must file an appeal with the appeals council within 60 days of receiving your hearing decision from the hearing officer or administrative law judge, as they often call them. Now we're going to go over that form. So I'd ask you to go to the next slide, Mike. This is the form that's for a request for reconsideration. It's a 4-page form. The first page is the one we're going to go over in some detail. 1 page is instructions. I think the 3rd page might be a duplication of this form. And then there's a privacy notice as the 4th page. I'm going to ask you to go to the next slide, please, Mike. The top of this form indicates that it's an SSA 561 and it's entitled Request for Reconsideration. So you know you have the right form. So as an SSDI beneficiary, you're going to start filling this out. You're going to have your name and Social Security number. And then the next field is issue being appealed. Again, because of the nature of this webinar, it's going to be an overpayment for SSDI as opposed to maybe an eligibility issue. So if you look in parentheses, it says specify if, and then one of the words is overpayment. So in this field, you would fill it out, or if you're unable to fill it out, you'd have a family member, a trusted friend, or even an attorney or someone else help you fill out the form. But in this part of the form, you would put the issue being appealed, which is an overpayment. I urge you to make sure that you reread your overpayment notice that you received from Social Security, and you might be able to see what the nature of the reason is. It's probably that you've gone over SGA, or you have some earned income you failed to report. So in the issue being appealed, you could say it's an overpayment because Social Security thinks you have unearned income you didn't report. And then in the next section, it reads, I do not agree with the Social Security Administration's determination and request reconsideration. My reasons are And in this field, you're going to read the overpayment notice again and put the reasons why you think Social Security has made an error or it's just simply wrong. And that could be that you did not have this unearned income. It could be that you did properly report this income, or Social Security has simply sent you a notice that has information that doesn't apply to you. It does happen. Mistakes are made. Social Security is a very large government organization. We're going to go to the next slide, please. We're still on that first page of the form, ladies and gentlemen. I mentioned this section because it does not apply to SSDI recipients. I just wanted to point that out. If you read the instructions, it says supplemental security income, SSI, or special veteran benefits reconsideration only. This is something we discussed in the last webinar for SSI recipients. It does not apply to you. I just want to make sure you know that fact so you're not confused when you go through the form as an SSDI recipient. Next slide, please. And this is the bottom of that same single page form. This is where you're going to sign your name. If you have the name of someone who's going to help you out and represent you in your dealings with Social Security, that person or individual would put their name there. Again, it could be a family member, a trusted friend, and then you'll put your contact information as well as the representative's contact information, their mailing address, and their phone number. So Social Security has a place to send you information or notices once they receive your request for reconsideration. So once you complete this form, you'll mail it in with or without an extension of time request and with or without any supporting documents you think would help disprove the information in the overpayment notice so you don't have to pay money back to Social Security. Next slide, please. Well, we just finished talking about a request for reconsideration. Now we're going to talk about a waiver. This is the other way that you may be able to address your overpayment problem when you receive that notice of overpayment. Well, what is a waiver? A waiver simply asks Social Security to forgive or waive any amounts they claim that you owe them back because of some overpayment. The good thing is there's no time restriction for when you as an SSDI beneficiary can file for a waiver. That's in contrast to a request for reconsideration where you do have 60 days to file your request for reconsideration, and you have 30 days, the first 30 days of that 60-day period, to file the request for reconsideration so you don't lose your benefits pending your appeal. Always keep that in mind. For waivers, where you're asking Social Security to forgive or waive the amount you may owe, there is no such time limit. What do you need to prove in a waiver application in order to have Social Security give up their right to claim this money back from you? The first is you have to show you are without fault in causing the overpayment, and that if you are going to have to pay it back, you'd be unable to afford paying for those essential bills you need to survive: rent, food, utilities, things of that sort. Or on the alternative, you'd have to show that you're without fault in causing the overpayment and that having Social Security take back that money from you would simply be unfair. Social Security in their regulations describes it is that if they take the money back from you, it would be, quote, against equity and good conscience, close quote. That's really a fancy way of saying it's not fair. You might not have a lot of money, you might have very little income, you might even be destitute. So you'd have to prove to Social Security you're without fault in causing the overpayment and you can't afford to pay your bills if you need to pay the money back, or you're without fault in causing the overpayment and having Social Security take that money back from you would simply be unfair. Now, the problem with proving that you're without fault in causing an overpayment isn't just that you were ignorant about the rules that govern Social Security. You'd have to show something that you didn't actually cause an overpayment to be made, you didn't work too much, you didn't get overtime pay. You'd have to show factually why you're without fault, and then either show you don't have enough money to survive and pay your bills, or it's not fair given how little the overpayment is and how little you earn that you should pay it back. That's the idea behind a waiver, that they're going to give up their right to collect the money from you because you have really good reasons why they shouldn't. Now, there's a separate type of waiver called an administrative waiver. If you look at your notice of overpayment and the amount is less than $1,000, you or a family member or some other representative could then make a request in writing or verbally, although I strongly urge that anytime you have contact with the Social Security Administration, you make your requests or any communications in writing and you send it in a verifiable form, certified mail or some other way to prove that they received your correspondence. But if you make a request in writing or verbally and the amount that you're challenging is less than $1,000, if you make that request and there's no indication of fault by you in terms of being overpaid, Social Security will waive that sum of money. So that's a nice thing to know, that if you have your notice of overpayment and it's under $1,000, you might have a quick shortcut to have that amount waived and you don't have to pay it back to Social Security. Now, I also want to mention that with waivers, because there's no time limit to file a waiver, you can obviously do it after a request for reconsideration. You don't have to do it before. We're going to go to the next slide. How do you file an SSDI waiver? This is the not so good part. That first form I showed you was fairly easy to fill out. It's only a total of 40 pages and you really have to fill out a page or a page and a half. Not so with this form. The form for a waiver for Social Security disability insurance recipients is an SSA 632. There's a link on the slide to that form. It's a 14-page form, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sad to say that you do have to fill out the entire form. You may also have to attach documentation about your income, assets, and your expenses. Because you're requesting Social Security to forgive your overpayment, they do need detailed information about your finances in order to decide if a waiver should be granted. Much of this 14-page form is going to ask you about things you own, any income you receive, all of your household expenses on a monthly basis. And as I indicated, you may have to attach proof of some of your expenses, such as bills or receipts. Once you fill out this 14-page form and you provide all of the attached documents, you're going to mail it to Social Security. Remember, there's no time limit for waivers, so you're okay. So if it takes some time to fill it out and provide a package of information, that's okay. Just make sure you mail it to Social Security, your local field office, either by certified mail or some other verifiable means of mail to show they received it and you have proof of that fact. Now, if Social Security does not grant the waiver, a meeting with representatives must be scheduled. They'll then schedule a personal conference. If the personal conference is waived by you, you give up your right to it, or you decline to appear, the next step is a request for reconsideration of the waiver denial. If, however, you do have that conference, you attend it and it's held, and they deny your request for that waiver, you could then go before an administrative law judge and make your case again before a hearing officer using the same material, same information you provided initially, or additional information that you may have to show that you meet the standards for waiver, you're without fault, you can't pay the money back, or you're without fault, and you can't pay your ordinary and reasonable living expenses. I'm going to go to the next slide. Should you file a reconsideration or a waiver? Now, when you file a waiver, there's no time restriction in order to file it. You can file a waiver with a request for reconsideration, or you can file a waiver after your request for reconsideration. We recommend that you file a request for reconsideration first, because this way you make the Social Security Administration review their reasons on the notice of overpayment and possibly recalculate the amount of the overpayment or even decide there wasn't an overpayment. It does happen, ladies and gentlemen. Mistakes are made by the Social Security Administration. That's why if you have confusion about what's on the notice and the reasons for the overpayment, feel free to call them and have a representative walk you through that notice and explain step by step what the cause of their claimed overpayment is. But if you file the request for reconsideration, you put the burden on Social Security to do that case review of your file and consider any documents that you may have submitted in support of your request for reconsideration. Then, if your request for reconsideration is denied or it's even partially granted by reduction of the amount that you owe, you can then always file a waiver since there's no time limitation. and see if they'll give up their right to collect the balance or even all of it if you were denied in its entirety the first time around. So you can always start with a request for reconsideration because of time limitations. Remember, 60 days to file, 30 in order to maintain your benefits during the appeal. And then if you lose or you're partially successful, you can always file for a waiver afterwards. And next slide, please. And lastly, I want to leave you with a quick update on stimulus checks. This applies to dual eligible people. There may be people in the audience listening who receive both SSI and SSDI. I know this is about SSDI overpayments, today's webinar. But if you're dual eligible, when you challenge overpayments as an SSI and SSDI person, you generally should file separate documents with Social Security because there are separate units that deal with overpayments in SSI and SSDI. That's really for a later day in a later webinar. But if you are a dual recipient and you have an overpayment, understand that stimulus checks, as far as your SSI benefits, will not count towards your monthly resource limits. SSI recipients are limited to $2,000 in cash or assets, $3,000 for couples each month. Each of the 3 rounds of stimulus checks do not count towards the resource limits for SSI recipients. That's really good news. The only caveat, the only exemption is you must spend each stimulus check within 12 months of receiving it. So we're on our 3rd round of checks. That 12-month period starts from the time you receive each stimulus check. As you receive each stimulus check, if you spend down that check within 12 months, it will not apply to your monthly resource limits, and you shouldn't have an overpayment if you're an SSI and SSDI recipient. And lastly, ladies and gentlemen, I want to inform you that Disability Rights New Jersey will be presenting a webinar on stimulus checks and other COVID-related relief in about 2 weeks on May 5th. I welcome everyone to register for that upcoming webinar. I thank you for your attention and spending a portion of your afternoon with me today. And I'm now going to turn you over to my colleague, Susan Head. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. So what happens if you do nothing when you receive an overpayment letter? Of course, you can accept Social Security's decision about an overpayment and do nothing. However, if you don't submit an appeal within 30 days of receipt of the overpayment notice, Social Security will start withholding your benefits to recover the overpayment and may withhold the entire monthly check. If you do submit an appeal within 30 days, Social Security should not begin recovery on the overpayment while a decision is pending on the appeal. If Social Security deny your reconsideration appeal and/or waiver request and you can't afford the amount Social Security indicates they will withhold, which may be the entire check, you can request Social Security reduce the repayment amount. Social Security's preference is to try to recover the entire overpayment within 3 years. If you want to request Social Security withhold a smaller repayment amount, you'll need to complete and submit Social Security Form 634 to Social Security. You can find this form online or request the form from your local Social Security office. In order for Social Security to approve a reduced repayment rate, you'll need to show that you can't afford what Social Security calls ordinary and necessary living expenses. These are things like rent payments, food and transportation costs, utilities, insurance, medical expenses, etc. If the information you submit on Form 634 indicates you can't afford the repayment rate indicated by Social Security without experiencing financial hardship, Social Security may limit the monthly repayment amount to the difference between your income and expenses and approve a reduced repayment rate. For individuals receiving a Medicare Part D low-income subsidy, The repayment amount can be set as low as $10 a month. To help avoid an overpayment, report any income changes that may affect your eligibility for benefits to Social Security no later than 10 days after the end of the month that the change happened. A change could be that you worked just a few additional hours or you received a pay increase. Social Security letters, as many of you probably know, can be incredibly difficult to understand, and it's really important that you're clear why Social Security is contacting you. So if you receive a Social Security letter and you need help understanding what's in the letter, contact Social Security immediately and ask them to explain the letter to you. In addition, Social Security often sends out multiple overpayment letters. So you need to be clear when Social Security is alleging the overpayment happened and how much Social Security is claiming you were overpaid. As Charlie explained earlier, you have 60 days to submit a reconsideration appeal from the date on the initial overpayment letter. So make a note of the date so you can submit an appeal within the required time frame. The most important thing is to take action and respond to the letter. Don't put it to one side and hope the issue will go away. Also, be sure to keep good records such as pay stubs and bank statements, as well as receipts of out-of-pocket medical expenses in case Social Security requests this information. Reporting your income to Social Security whenever there is a change in your income will help prevent an overpayment. And there are several options available to report your wages. If you're interested in reporting your wages by phone, contact your local Social Security office to see if this option can work for you. You can also take copies of your pay stubs to your local Social Security office or mail them to the office. If you decide to mail copies of your pay stubs to Social Security, we recommend using certified mail. However, Social Security's preferred method for monthly wage reporting or any wage reporting whenever possible is to create a Social Security account and use the online tool available in the account to report wages. SSDI beneficiaries or their representative payees can report wages online through the My Social Security account. To set up an account, go to ssa.gov/my account. In addition to being able to report your income after you've created an account, you can also check on the status of appeals, review past earnings, request a benefit verification letter or a replacement Medicare card. After you report your wages online, you can also save or print a copy of a receipt. Social Security work incentives are special rules intended to create a safety net for SSI and SSDI beneficiaries who want to go to work or continue working. Here are some examples of work incentives you may be eligible to receive. We don't have time to discuss these in depth today. The main point is to make you aware that they exist, as they may be helpful in your situation. Also, if you are eligible for one or more work incentives, they may also help reduce an overpayment. Expedited reinstatement, or EXR, is a Social Security work incentive and a safety net if a person has been terminated from SSDI or SSI benefits due to work activity. Here's the eligibility criteria for EXR, which is the person must reapply for benefits within 5 years of the month their benefits were terminated. The benefits must have been terminated due to work-related income, and the person must continue to meet Social Security's definition of disability and also not be earning over substantial gainful activity. If Social Security approve EXR, they will provide the beneficiary 6 months of provisional benefits, while a decision on reinstating benefits is pending. Another Social Security work incentive are impairment-related work expenses, or IRWEs. These are out-of-pocket medical expenses related to a person's primary disability or any secondary disability on record at Social Security and necessary for the person to go to work or maintain employment. These are examples of IRWEs Social Security may approve. You can also take a look at Social Security's Red Book, accessible via this link, or you can also just type SSA Red Book into your internet search engine and it should appear. The key point about IRWEs is that after the 9-month trial work period, any IRWEs that Social Security approve can be deducted from a person's gross monthly earnings. This can reduce countable earnings below the SGA amount and help maintain a person's eligibility for SSDI or reduce an overpayment. However, before an IRWE can be subtracted from earnings, Social Security must approve the expense, and prior to doing this, will want to see actual receipts of the requested IRWE. So in the example Kathleen introduced earlier, Alice was notified by Social Security that she had an overpayment as a result of substantial gainful activity. So let's look at options Alice may have to reduce the overpayment. When Social Security is determining Alice's countable income for SGA, the $350 Alice paid out of pocket may be disregarded. Social Security must have information on file about Alice's disability, but they may not be aware she is paying out of pocket for medications and transportation in order to work. In order for Social Security to consider deducting this or any other IRWE expense, they will need documentation supporting her need for the requested IRWE and receipts of the actual expenses. Even if a Social Security disability recipient does not have an overpayment, they should make Social Security aware of any out-of-pocket medical expenses, so any approved expense can be deducted from income whenever these expenses are incurred. So here's an example of how an approved IRWE can reduce countable income below the SGA level. As you can see, prior to the application of the IRWE, Alice's gross monthly earnings exceeded the SGA threshold. However, after applying the IRWE, Alice's income falls below SGA, which means there's no overpayment for this month or any month an approved IRWE reduces income below SGA. Here's a free service that can help New Jersey residents aged 14 to 64 who receive Social Security benefits and who want to work or continue working. New Jersey Work Incentives Network Support, or New Jersey WINS, will create an individualized report about your benefits and help you understand whether you're eligible for any work incentives. If you schedule an appointment with New Jersey WINS, you'll also be able to receive follow-up assistance to help ensure that any work incentives you're eligible to receive have been identified and correctly applied. Here's a quick review of some of the information we discussed today. We have about 10 minutes left for questions, so I'll hand over now to Mike. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks, everybody. We had some questions going back and forth in the chat, and I saw that our presenters were answering some of them. Charles, Kathleen, I'll leave it to you. Would you like to address any of the questions to the whole group?
Well, I think you're muted, Charlie, but I was looking at the chat, and I think we answered everything. And there's one person, and I'm going to message her separately because I'd like to have more information about the situation before I give any information. So I'm going to ask this person to contact DRNJ and do an intake just so that we can make sure that we understand all of the facts of your situation. Are there any other questions? You can unmute yourself. You could even put your camera on if Mike says it's okay and ask a question. We've got a few minutes left.
I say it's okay. I say it's okay,
Cool.
sure. Carmela did put a question right in the chat at the end there, and I'm not sure if everybody saw it. Would an approved IRWI be able to be retroactive and thereby possibly eliminate an overpayment?
I would, my answer to that is it is always definitely worth taking IRWIs to Social Security, even if the overpayment happened previously, and ask Social Security if they will consider them.
Dan asked if there can be copies to the slide. I don't see why not. I don't know if the speakers have a preference. I had mentioned in the chat before, when we get this uploaded online, we will share the link with you to this recording, as well as we'll share the one from last time as well. So you have both. We'll send them both in the same email. As I mentioned earlier, I would not expect that much before Monday. By the time it gets uploaded and shared with you. And if you would like the slides, as long as the other presenters are okay with the slides, we can include them too.
Can I just answer Marianne's question? She asked how it's possible to know where a person is in their trial work period. And the answer is it's very, very difficult. And so that's one of the reasons to stay in touch with Social Security. You can also ask Social Security for a work and earnings chart to show you exactly where you are in your trial work period. And they should be able to give you that. It's called a work and earnings chart. And on that chart, it will show the months that the individual has earned at the trial work period level. And it will also show the extended period of eligibility months. So just stay in touch with Social Security and ask them for that.
I don't see any other questions, but I did want to say we at Disability Rights New Jersey, we help people with disabilities with various legal issues. And even if it's not related to an overpayment, please give us a call. We're here to help. Even if it's not something that we work on specifically, we will help get you to the right place. And that's all I have. Thank you so much, everybody, for your attentiveness. You asked some great questions, and we really appreciate your time today.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.